There we go. Welcome and thank you for joining us today on the Heroes and Icons podcast. I'm your host, Greg Randolph. Please find me on Instagram at Heroes and Icons podcast to get updates for great shows like this and others. If you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe, rate, and share the show. I would appreciate that very much. We have another special guest today. If you are a baseball fan, especially of the Cincinnati Reds in the World Series, this gentleman needs no introduction. The National Baseball Hall of Fame inducted him as the Ford C. Frick Award winner for major contributions to the game of baseball in 2000. He was hired by the Cincinnati Reds in 1974 to replace Al Michaels, and alongside the legendary Joe Nuxhall, they formed the beloved Marty and Joe combination for several decades. Notable calls include being behind the mic in his first Reds game in 1974 to call Hank Aaron's record-tying 714th home run to tie Babe Ruth. Hit number 4192 in 1985 by Pete Rose to pass Ty Cobb on the all-time hit list. 3 World Series wins in 1975, 1976, and 1990. 8 no-hitters, one of which was a perfect game by Tom Browning, and another was the only one thrown by Hall of Famer Tom Seaver, as well as milestone home runs numbers 500 and 600 by Ken Griffey Jr. In 2007, he had the privilege of calling a Reds game with his son Tom. He called his last game for the Reds on September 26, 2019. And in 2019, he was also the first Reds non-player to be inducted into the Reds Hall of Fame. My guest today on the Heroes and Icons podcast is Marty Brennaman. Marty, it is such an honor to have you on with me today. How are you and Amanda doing, and what's keeping you both busy these days?
Well, I'm doing fine, Greg, and I appreciate you having me on your podcast. Amanda and I have done nothing but seemingly travel the world for the last 3 years or so. We were in Europe twice this past summer, went on a cruise, river cruise down the Danube, starting in Prague and ending up in Budapest. And this recently came back from 2 weeks in England, which is rapidly becoming, at least from a city standpoint, London's probably our favorite city in Europe. And we're leaving on a cruise within the next 5 days. And so we're staying busy. Thank God I'm married to the woman I'm married to, because she won't let me sit around and do nothing. So I'm blessed in that respect.
Absolutely. She got you out of the hotel, to jump ahead a little bit. She got you out of the hotel a while back and got you to go see the Grand Canyon. What did you think of it, by the way?
Well, it was funny because it was probably, I don't know, 6-7 years ago. And we were in spring training and we had some time off. And she said, why don't we make a trip to go to the Grand Canyon? I said, I'm not interested in going to the Grand Canyon. And she said, well, you're really going to like it. I said, I like it or not, it's immaterial. I'm not going. She said, well, let me tell you what I'm going to do. If you don't agree to go to the Grand Canyon, I'm going to pack my suitcase and go to the airport and fly home. So confronted with that alternative, I elected to grudgingly go to the Grand Canyon, and she was right. It was one of the great experiences of my life. We had a wonderful time. We went up on the South Rim and took a train up there out of Williams, Arizona. It was just a great trip, and it's one of the wonders of the world as far as I'm concerned, the Grand Canyon. I would highly recommend anybody going to it. And so I learned a lesson early on, I think, that, when she endorses a place, that it's worth taking a look at. And so far, she's been right about just about everything in terms of our travel situation.
Absolutely. It's really an amazing place. I'm glad you got to see it. So let me start in on some baseball things. How did you first learn to appreciate baseball, and which teams or players did you follow growing up?
Well, I grew up in Virginia, in what they call the Tidewater area of Virginia, Norfolk, Portsmouth, Virginia Beach. I was born and raised in Portsmouth. And as a kid, I would run up and down the dial, and I became enamored with listening to baseball on the radio. And a great story, I guess it was 1954 or 55. I was probably 12, 13 years old. And I came upon a guy doing Brooklyn Dodger baseball, a fellow by the name of Nat Albright. And I was just taken, not so much because he was broadcasting for the Dodgers, because I was not a Dodgers fan, but I was so taken by his presentation, his play-by-play presentation, never dreaming until years later when I found out that he was recreating Brooklyn Dodger ball games out of a studio in Arlington, Virginia. He did it with the blessing of the O'Malley family who owned the Dodgers. They thought it was a great idea for somebody to recreate their games on a daily basis and pump those games into the southeastern part of the United States with the thinking that maybe they would build a fan base that they otherwise had not had before. And so I think listening to Nat Albright, the seed was planted in my mind that one day this might be something that I'd like to do. Never dreaming at the time, and it was not a conscious decision on my part. When I listened to him, this is what I wanted to do. And so years later, and I'm going fast forward, then I'm going to back up again. When I was inducted, when they called me and told me about going into the Broadcasters Wing of the Hall of Fame, I did some research and found out that he was still alive. And so I got his phone number, gave him a call. I identified myself, but he knew who I was because he was still a baseball fan. And I think Nat at that time was 86, 87 years old when I talked to him. And I just called, and he was kind of perplexed that I would call him. And so I told him this story. And I said, I would be extremely remiss, and I would go to my grave not happy with myself if I had not made this phone call and told you what a positive influence that subconsciously you became to me in listening to you recreate Brooklyn Dodger games back in the 50s. And he was so emotionally taken by that. And I thanked him for it. And he broke down and cried on the phone. And then I think 4 to 6 months later, he was dead. And I appreciated that fact. And now it's almost like I've gone full circle because I constantly have young people in the business come up to me and say, you had a lot to do with my decision to one day get into this business. And I feel like if there are people who have made such an impact on you, whether you want to be a baseball broadcaster or a lawyer or whatever the case might be, and there's one person that was individually responsible for maybe planting that seed, you owe it to that person to let them know. And I've tried to do that over the years in my career. And but back then, I also listened to the Washington Senators. I listened to the Baltimore Orioles, who had one of the great teams of all time, and in Bill O'Donnell and Chuck Thompson. Chuck's in the Broadcasters Wing of the Hall of Fame. And then when I in that same period, I had an uncle who lived in Pittsburgh, and every summer I'd go up for a week or 10 days, and we'd go to Forbes Field and watch the Pirates play. Pirates were horrible. They were a terrible team. You know, they lose 100 or close to 100 every year. And so I became somewhat of a Pirate fan to the extent that when they won the World Series in 1960 against the New York Yankees, I was a freshman in college, and I was a fraternity guy. And I'll always remember where I was in Game 7 when Bill Mazeroski hit the home run in the bottom of the ninth inning over the left field wall at Forbes Field to give the Pirates a world championship. So there were a multitude of things that put me on a path that eventually ended with me becoming a big league broadcaster. However, in between those times, that probably being a big league baseball broadcaster was the furthest thing from my mind. But I'm getting ahead of myself now, and we'll get to those things, I'm sure, during this podcast.
Yes, sir. When you also called football and basketball games, and you worked for the Virginia Squires of the ABA. And if that sounds familiar to our listeners, they had future NBA Hall of Famers in George Gervin and Julius Erving.
And Charlie Scott.
Yes, and Charlie Scott. And what were those early days in your broadcasting career like before you got to the Reds?
Well, I began my career at a small radio station in North Carolina, a 1,000-watt station in Salisbury, North Carolina, WSTP Radio, which is not even in existence anymore. And I spent 5 years there, and it was a tremendous learning ground for me because I'd had no experience doing play-by-play until I did my first high school football game in Salisbury in the fall of 1970, or 1965, I should say. And so I was in a town that, and was not making enough money for anybody to demand that I be good right out of the chute. And they allowed me to learn my craft my baptism under fire, so to speak. And I did high school football and basketball. I did American Legion baseball, which in North Carolina and Virginia and South Carolina, the Southeast, Legion baseball was then and still is today really a big deal in small towns. The team that I broadcast for, Rowan County in North Carolina, played upwards of 50 to 60 games in the summertime. I mean, they played virtually every night once they started playing in June, and they won a state championship. And I really enjoyed broadcasting baseball, but I was doing small college football. They have a liberal arts school there, Catawba College. I did their games on the radio, their football and basketball games for 5 years. So I got a chance to learn the play-by-play intricacies of football, baseball, and basketball. And so when the time came and the Washington Capitals and the ABA decided to move out of D.C. and move into Virginia and become a regional franchise, the radio contract was won by a station in Norfolk, WTAR Radio, and they were looking. They had a fellow who ran the station who was very important in my life and in my career, named Jack Prince, who has been living forever and more in Dallas over many, many years. But Jack was looking for a guy with local ties, and I was recommended to him by a guy that worked on the sales force at the radio station in Norfolk, but was from Portsmouth, Virginia, and I knew him, a fellow by the name of Billy Skeeter. And Billy recommended that they contact me. Long story short, they contacted me. I got the job. And I got the job principally to come to Norfolk to be the voice of the Virginia Squires. And then the baseball thing came later when I did 3 years of AAA baseball in Norfolk. At that time, it was the New York Mets Farm Club. And I did 3 years with the Tidewater Tides. I did 1 year of Virginia Tech football. I did 1 year of William and Mary football. And out of that came the opportunity to come to Cincinnati, which I did in 1974.
And you beat out, if I have this number right, you beat out 220 other candidates, and that was based on your approach and desire. And they said that was top notch, and that's what put you over the top there.
Well, they may have said that, but I'm convinced they got the list narrowed down to 3 people, and the other two were big league broadcasters, existing broadcasters. And I'm convinced I got the job because I'd be willing to work for less money than they would have commanded. I know what they said, but I felt like they were going to get me. They liked my work. Not that they didn't. They would never have hired me to replace Al if they didn't. But I do think that they got me a whole lot less money than they would have gotten the other 2 guys or one of the other 2 guys.
That seems to be a key factor in those things sometimes. Yes, sir. So you're hired by the Reds in '74, and you've called some spring training games, but nothing could have prepared you. Your first Reds game, we're on the verge of Hank Aaron not tying but possibly breaking the record from Babe Ruth. And so what was that game like, and what was that atmosphere and the time of the ballpark like in that week?
Well, it was opening day, and I'd never been in a ballpark with 55,000 people. I was awed by the immensity of the whole thing. And, people had been trying to prepare me verbally for what I was going to be looking at. It was hard not to be awestruck by it all. Amazingly, though, as big a story as it was, I really did not give a whole lot of thought to the possibility that I would broadcast home run number 714 as far as Aaron was concerned. I was just so taken aback by the interest in the city and the ballpark, and kids getting out of school for a day if they had tickets to opening day. And it was just a special thing that then, and it's still a special thing in this town today, maybe more special than any other opening day I've ever been associated with. And over the years, I was experienced a lot of opening days for other ball clubs after we had done our opening day thing, and then went on the road and teams would have their home opener. So it was just an incredible thing. And there was some controversy around the Aaron thing, because the Braves were playing a 3-game series here. Then they were going to go to Fulton County Stadium in Atlanta and open up their home season on a Friday night against the Dodgers. And I think their intention was, I think their desire would have been to not play Aaron at all. But Bowie Kuhn, the commissioner, stepped in and let it be known that he had to start 2 games. They could pick the 2. Did not say that he had to play a full 2 games. All they said was he has to start 2 games. So they started him on opening day, and it was 4 batters in. My career was 4 batters in when he hit a 3-run home run off Jack Bellingham in the first inning of Game 1 to tie Ruth's record. And of course, that was the debut, my regular season debut, also with the guy that you mentioned earlier I worked with for 31 years, and Joe Nuxhall. And when the top of the first inning ended and the Braves had a 3-0 lead on Aaron's home run, Nuxhall said, "What the hell do you do for an encore?" And I said, "I don't know." I said, it was quite a way to break in for a rookie big league baseball broadcaster to be involved in an historic moment like that. Gerald Ford was there to add to the day, and it was just a special moment. I hear the call even today. People play it periodically on the anniversary of number 714. And I was very happy with the call. I didn't stumble over my words. I didn't try to plan anything cute to say. That's never been my thing. I just try to convey the atmosphere, the immense.
So you're hired by the Reds in 1974, and
Right.
you've called some spring training games, but nothing could have possibly prepared you to record a record time, possibly record breaking home run in Hank Aaron, passing Babe Ruth on the all-time home run list. Can you describe the atmosphere of the ballpark that week and that day? What was that like for you?
Well, it was overwhelming. I'd never been in a ballpark with 55,000 people before. I'd never experienced what opening day in Cincinnati was like. And it's the same today, whether it's a good ball club or a bad ball club or a mediocre ball club. Opening day is unlike any city unlike any day in the calendar year here in Cincinnati. And I was involved in opening days, home openers for other teams over the years. And none of them have equal what they do in this town. So I was awed by the atmosphere, and also with the knowledge that Aaron had a chance to tie or break a record that's been standing forever and a day. Didn't give a lot of thought to how I was going to react when Aaron hit the home run, if he hit one. Because I had never been of that school where I was going to try and prepare something that I thought was cute to say or was memorable in the minds of people. I didn't feel like I was that good. I just tried to convey the moment, the atmosphere of the moment, and things of that nature, and whatever came out, came out. And so opening day came, and 4 batters into my professional career as a big league broadcaster, not counting spring training, he hit a 3-run home run off Jack Bellingham in the first inning. It was a line drive that just got over the wall and left. And so he ties Babe Ruth's home run record. There was a lot of controversy going into the series because obviously the Braves would have been perfectly content not to play him at all, because they were going to go home right after the opening series in Cincinnati to have their home opener on a Friday night against the Dodgers. And they wanted nothing better than to have him tie and then break the record of Aaron's. And the commissioner had to step in. Bowie Kuhn said, no, in the best interest of baseball, he's going to have to start 2 games. And to his credit, he didn't say he had to start and play 9 innings or however long the games might be. He just said he had to start 2 games. So he starts the opener. He ties a record. He started the second game, and I don't think the second game he went to the plate but one time, and they took him out. And then did not start the third game, and then went home And in true Henry Aaron fashion, he broke the record before a standing room only crowd at Fulton County Stadium on that Friday night when he hit home run number 15 off of Al Downing.
Mhm.
And everybody was happy. But it was quite a way for a young rookie big league baseball broadcaster to break in. I don't know anyone going back to when I came in '74 and all the young guys that made their debuts as a big league broadcaster after I did that ever had such a historic break in as I did. So I was blessed in that respect, and I'm forever thankful because of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what were the early Reds years like for you? You come in and you replace Al Michaels, and then you're paired up for 31 years with someone who was a brother to you basically, and Joe
Yeah.
Nuxhall. What did Joe mean to you?
Well, he meant everything to me, but and our relationship got closer and closer and closer the longer we went. Really got close when I decided to take up the game of golf back in the early '90s, and we would go on the road and we'd get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and one of us would have rented a car, and we'd go to a golf course that had it all set up in all the cities that we went to, and we'd play golf. We'd be back in the hotel by noon. Joe would take what he called a power nap, and then we'd get on the bus and go to the ballpark at 4 or 4:30 in the afternoon, wherever we might have been. Um, he was a very special person. I've often said that, with all due respect to Pete Rose, who's a dear friend of mine today, to Oscar Robertson, who was a great basketball player here at the University of Cincinnati, and although he was from Indianapolis, he made his home here in Cincinnati. Um, Joe's probably the biggest sports icon in the history of this city for a lot of reasons. He was wonderfully loved by everybody who came in contact with him. He had no ego. He was great with fans. He would sit and talk to you if you were a stranger for as long as you wanted to talk baseball, and he would talk to you in a manner in which you would walk away feeling like you'd known him all your life. And so we just had a very special relationship. In the 31 years that he and I worked together full time, equal the longest that any two guys had worked as a tandem in a major league radio booth. And that other group was Vin Scully and Jerry Doggett with the Los Angeles Dodgers. No one's worked longer than that. So we had a special relationship, and we genuinely loved each other. And it was very tough for me the last game that Joe did, because it was just hard getting through it, knowing that we would never work together again. And I was just blessed to come into a city that essentially he owned, because he was born and raised in Hamilton, Ohio, which is a suburb of Cincinnati. Went to high school there, and broke in as a 15-year-old back in the '40s, living at home with his mom and dad, and never left this town. And so I was blessed to be able to work with a guy who was as helpful as he was, and it really made the transition for me a whole lot easier than it might otherwise have been. The funny thing was that even though we started that '74 season, probably 2 months into it, he would make a mistake and he would refer to me as Al rather than Marty, and then he would apologize profusely. He felt so bad about it. And I understood. It didn't offend me at all. I mean, he and Al were together for 3 years and they were tight. And so he finally got over that. But it was really funny because it was probably 60 to 90 days before the last reference to me was labeled Al rather than Marty.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I can understand that. I can certainly see that. Um, Let me ask you about another big time in those early moments, and that's for the Big Red Machine in the 1975 World Series. Um, and that was one of the greatest in Major League history, and so many great moments there. But are there a couple of key moments in that series that stood out to you as the reasons why the Reds emerged victorious in that World Series and not the Red Sox?
Well, first off, people need to remember, I'm sure there are a lot of people that were not even around then, but as time goes by, one big absence in the Boston Red Sox lineup was Jim Rice,
Hmm.
who was one of the great players in the American League, great players in baseball at the time. He suffered a broken hand when he was hit by a pitch from a guy who later became pitching coach with the Reds and who was a dear friend of all of us, and Vern Rule, was pitching for the Detroit Tigers, and he hit Jim in the hand and broke his hand in a game in September. So he was not even in the equation. And I've often said, trying to be as objective as I could be, it would have been interesting to see how this series, whether it turned out the same way or whether Boston won it had Jim Rice been in the lineup, which he wasn't. But it will go down probably as having one game that maybe stood out from all World Series games ever played, and that was Game 6. A lot of people will tell you that's arguably the greatest single baseball game that's ever been played because it had everything. It had great defense. It had Jim Rice throwing George Foster out. I mean, Joe Morgan out at the plate late. May have been the ninth inning. It won the game for Cincinnati. George Foster making a great catch and then throwing Denny Doyle out at the plate that would have won the game for the Red Sox. Big home runs. The home run that Bernie Carbo hit a pinch hit home run in the eighth inning when it looked like the Reds were going to be world champions. And speaking of that home run, NBC came to me in the eighth inning and said, "We need you to go downstairs in the Reds clubhouse and get ready for the post-game celebration." They had a 3-run lead at the time. And so I packed my stuff up. I went down to the clubhouse, and I watched the rest of the game on an 8-inch black and white television with rabbit ears sitting on top of a dugout, a locker room stool. And of course, Carbo hit the 3-run pinch hit home run off Raleigh Eastwick. And then they won it on the Carlton Fisk home run in extra innings. It was an amazing game. And I think that Sparky really felt that the Red Sox were going to win the World Series because rarely, if ever, did his bullpen give up a late home run like that to beat them or to tie them. He had a bullpen of Eastwick and a left-hander, Will McInerney, and then right-handers Clay Carroll and Pedro Borbon. And they were interchangeable parts. They were one of the major assets of that team because all those guys could pitch seemingly every day. And so that never happened, but it did this time. And so he was convinced. He stayed up until 5 o'clock in the morning. He couldn't go to sleep, and he was convinced that they were going to lose Game 7, which obviously they didn't. Perez hit a big home run late off Bill Lee to tie the game up, and then came the base hit by Morgan in the ninth inning to win the seventh game and then win the World Series. We had 2 days of rain in Boston before Game 6 and 7.
Right.
And guys had to sit around and find something to do. And Sparky had to map out a plan where they could go work out. And it was just an interesting time. Early in the series, they get beat in the first game when Louis Tiant shut them out at Riverfront Stadium. And so they come back in Game 2, or rather not at Riverfront, but at Fenway Park. And the biggest nightmare that Sparky had about that series was that guys who had never seen that ballpark before would see that the green monster in left field, which was like a chip shot in golf. Mm-hmm. And all they would try to do is lift the ball, and because they were convinced they could hit the ball out of the ballpark. And that was the kiss of death. And so, sure enough, in Game 1, right-hand hitters were trying to lift the ball over the thing, and left-hand hitters were trying to go inside out and hit the ball the other way, and Tiant shot him out. And then in Game number 2, Bench had a big hit late in the game to give the Reds a lead, in which they won the game and went to Riverfront all even up at 1-1. In the meantime, Tony Perez had not had a hit, and he went hitless in Game 3. He came into the clubhouse in Game 4. Reds had won Game 2, Game 3 to go up 2-1. They came to Game 4, and he was 0 for 14 or 0 for 15 or something like that in the series. And he walked into the clubhouse, and all the guys were clapping and cheering, and he couldn't understand that. He finally said, "Look, you're one at-bat away from tying the record of futility in the World Series. So we're pulling for you to go hitless tonight and set that record all to yourself, all designed to take the pressure off And that night he hit 2 home runs to lead the Reds to the win. It was a World Series that seemingly had everything. It was a great time to be a Reds fan because they came home. They'd gotten the monkey off their backs because they lost the 70 World Series to Baltimore.
Right.
They lost the 72 World Series to Oakland.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a feeling among people that as great as this team appeared to be, that they would never truly realize their greatness until they won a world championship. I don't think guys consciously thought about it, but I know that it was in the minds of a lot of people with the organization and outside the organization if you were simply a fan. And then by winning that series, they took the proverbial monkey off their backs. And then, of course, in 76, they swept the New York Yankees 4 straight to become truly one of the great teams in the history of baseball.
Was that just a general sentiment that hey, we're called the Big Red Machine, and we need to live up to that name, that title? Or was it something that did Sparky do anything different? Did he give the team any different magic than he normally had otherwise?
I don't think so, Greg. I think he had so much faith and confidence in that ball club that he didn't do anything out of the ordinary. He just let them go play. They had a great way about them. Even during the regular seasons, they were very businesslike. They would go out and they would systematically beat your brains out. And they would do it in such a manner that it did not incur the wrath of the other team. I don't think anybody felt that they were going out to embarrass teams when they beat them bad. They just go out and win. They had an incredible rivalry with the LA Dodgers. In the decade of the 70s, I felt like that was the greatest rivalry in baseball. They were both in the same division. The Reds won the Western Division in 75 by 10 games and then beat the Red Sox. They won the Western Division in 76 by 20 games. Wow. and then beat the Yankees in 4 straight. And I was convinced then, and I'm convinced today, that the LA Dodgers were better than the Red Sox and they were better than the New York Yankees. Mm-hmm. They just had the misfortune of being in the same division with that Big Red Machine team. They had great confidence in their ability. They rarely ever beat themselves. Their starting pitching was underrated, and that was because Sparky, who acquired the nickname Captain Hook, had a policy that if you, as one of my starters, went out and pitched 6 innings or more, and you had the lead, I would do everything in my power to make sure you did not lose that lead and you got the win. And that meant going to his bullpen. And oftentimes, the mindset back then was among starting pitchers, not only in Cincinnati, but everywhere. It's not that way today, but their feeling was individually and collectively, when my turn came to pitch, my job was to pitch 9 innings. And anything short of that, I didn't do my job. Mm-hmm. Sparky didn't look at it that way. And Sparky had a policy. When Larry Shepard goes to the mound, Larry was a pitching coach, he's coming out to talk to you if you're in a tough situation to try and help you through it. When I come out there, you're coming back to the dugout with me. And my policy is when I come to the mound, I stick my hand out, you put the ball in my hand, don't open your mouth. I'm not interested in hearing you try to convince me to not take you out because you're coming out. They didn't like that. They didn't like that at all. We had one starting pitcher named Freddie Norman, who was a left-hander, who was as good a competitor as I've ever been around. He wanted to pitch 9 innings every time he went out. He had a screwball, which is his out pitch. And so he was about he's about 5'8.5", 5'9", and rather wide, but a great competitor and a good pitcher. When Sparky came to the mound to take him out, Freddie, with the ball in his hand, would walk to second base. And now he's the only one that Sparky would put up with to do that. He would go to second. Sparky would get to the mound. Sparky would wait very patiently. Freddie would turn around. He'd come back to the mound, never made eye contact with Sparky. Sparky's hand would be out. Freddie would put the ball in his hand and go to the dugout. And Jack Billingham, who won 19 games back-to-back seasons, he and his wife have become dear friends of mine and my wife over the years. They're just wonderful people. And I can light Jack up today by simply mentioning Sparky. And how Sparky's philosophy was right. He needed to get you out, especially because you had a propensity for giving up home runs. And so his decision, if it was only yours, it was a good one. And Jack gets all bent out of shape and would start in on Sparky. Even today, it would rile him up a little bit. It was an incredible experience for a young broadcaster. In fact, I really felt you're supposed to do it every year. And they do it in 75. They did it in 76. In 1977, the Reds were in Philadelphia to play the Phillies, and they had a broadcaster named Byron Stamm, who eventually became a member of the Broadcasters Wing of the Hall of Fame. And he came up to me one day and he said, "Young man, do you realize how fortunate you are?" And rather flippantly, I said, I'm a young guy and I got a big league broadcasting job." He said, "I don't mean that." He said, "You're right about that." But he said, "You have been there 3 full years and you have 2 world championship rings." I said, "Yes, I'm aware of that." He said, "I've been broadcasting Philadelphia baseball since 1947 and I've never gotten one." Well, I don't even know whether I appreciated the fact that he had never gotten one, because I had 2. And it wasn't until we went from 76 until 1990, when that team, led by Barry Larkin and Eric Davis and the Nasty Boys and et cetera, won the World Series, sweeping the Oakland A's. And I truly appreciated the hard work, the talent, and the luck. You have to have good fortune to win a World Series or win a Super Bowl or whatever the case might be. People overlook that. But I that's why 1990 is probably my favorite team. I enjoyed that team more than I did the 75, 76 team. However, as the years went by, it took a lot of years for me to truly realize how great that 75, 76 team was. Because then as years went by, I had a chance to compare that team with some of the other good teams that came along. And as I sit here talking to you today, with great prejudice, I can tell you unequivocally, I've never seen a team as talented as that team was. And when people say it's maybe the greatest team of all time, maybe it is. Maybe it is.
Well, there was certainly Sparky. I'm sure he sounds like he was a real beauty to work with, and he just had a certain way of describing things. Am I saying that right?
Yes, that's good.
Is that a delicate way to say that? Maybe.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
He was grossly underrated. I've had people say to me today, my junior in high school could have managed that team. And I said, "You have no idea what you're saying." I said, there were so many things that went on that people at that time were not aware of. Most notably, Pete Rose and Johnny Bench really did not care for each other. They were lockered at opposite ends of the clubhouse, which was not by accident. That was by design. To their credit and to their professionalism, they would go out and play, and whatever differences they had personally, they played, and they played together. They could have destroyed that team. But they were pros, and the results were obvious. Sparky always had to be aware of that. I don't want to say tension, but operated with the knowledge that there was no love lost between the two of them. We had a team of tremendous egos. When you have Bench and Rose and Morgan and Perez and people like that, you've got great players, and great players normally have pretty good sized egos. He was able to handle every bit of that and keep a cohesive, pleasant attitude about the team, generally speaking, that led to their success. Nobody could have managed that team better than Sparky Anderson did.
Absolutely. And there's a passage in, I don't know if you saw the link to the book I sent you. It's called Game 6, about the 1975 World Series Game 6 by Mark Frost. And it talks about how he went back and forth about the lineup for that game. Like he had I think he had Joe batting second, and then he obviously ended up switching that out. So it was Rose, Griffey, Morgan, if I have that right. And so that I don't think that was very easy for him to do either, because back in those days, you as a manager, you really had to trust your gut. I mean, you had some stats and charts and those things, but not anything like it is today.
No, that's exactly right. He just had an intuitiveness about him, and an attitude about him. we had the most strict rules of any team in baseball because guys had to wear their stirrups the way the stirrups were made to be worn. Nobody could wear anything but black shoes, no facial hair, no long hair. And he was smart enough to know that anytime he had a rules change or he had something that had to be conveyed to the players on the team that may not sit well with them, he would call in Rose, Morgan, Perez, and Rose, Morgan, Perez, and Bench.
Right.
Those four. He would call them in. He'd say, okay, here's the deal. And they bought in. And every time they bought in to what he wanted to do, there wasn't anybody else in that clubhouse that was going to say, the hell with that. I'm not doing that. If those guys did it, and he was smart enough to know the psychology of having your big guys in your hip pocket. And he would hold meetings with them regularly if there were things that needed to be addressed. And they always bought into what he wanted to do. And that had as much to do with the success of it than anything else with this team.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Let me mention something. You mentioned Mark Frost's book.
Yes.
I helped Mark Frost out. I was his go-to guy. I put him in touch with almost everybody or a goodly number of the players on that team to enable them to write the book. I got to know him. He's become a dear friend of mine over the years. In fact, his nephew, a lot of people don't know this, is Lucas Giolito, who is a big league pitcher, and he's Mark's nephew. And Mark has been justifiably proud of him. And Mark Frost was a great screenwriter, a television screenwriter. He's done a lot of wonderful things. But Game 6 is one of the great baseball books of all time.
Oh, you heard it here, folks. Go buy that book. It's really fantastic.
Yeah, it is.
I have that, and I've read it a couple times. Let me. How are we doing on time here?
We're good. We're good.
Okay. So Ken Griffey Jr. hit his 500th and 600th career home runs as a Red. Why was it so important to Jr. that you had the call for those?
Well, that's an interesting story, which I'm sure you already know. But he came up to me one day in the clubhouse, and I think he was sitting on 498. And he said, "I need to talk to you." And I said, "Okay." He said, "We've known each other a long time." I said, "Yes, we have." I said, "I've known you since you were knee high to a grasshopper and used to run around the clubhouse." And he said, "That's the reason why it's important to me that you broadcast my 500th home run." And I said, "Well, I'm honored that you feel that way." I said, "And as long as that home run doesn't come in the third, fourth, and seventh innings, I'd be thrilled to do it." And obviously, like most players, he didn't know what our format was. He paid no attention. And for years, Joe did the third, fourth, and seventh. The guy who replaced him was a fellow by the name of Steve Stewart, who now is with the Kansas City Royals, and he did the third, fourth, and seventh. And I told Junior, I said, if you come to the bat in one of those innings and you hit number 500, I'm not going to call. He said, "Well, I don't know about that, but you got to call my 500th home run." I said, "Well, again, I'm going to repeat what I just told you." So it got a little bit heated. And finally, we met with Phil Castellini, who was the chief operating officer at the time with the club. And I said, "Let me tell you something." I said, "We all have egos." I said, "I don't have an ego big enough that I'm going to take at bat away from the guy who normally works an inning. That's not the way I operate." And so we go back and forth. And I finally said, "Okay, the only way I will do your at bats in the innings in which we're talking about is if the club puts out a release and plays this whole thing publicly, so people know that I was not the one that asked to be on the mic for each of your at bats. So my voice is on that home run. If the club puts out the release and people understand that it's not me asking for this, then I'll be happy to do it." And they did that. And fortunately, number 500 came on Father's Day in St. Louis when he hit number 500 off Matt Morris. And it was a wonderful experience because his mom and dad were there, his wife and kids were there, and the Cardinal fans, who I think are the greatest fans in baseball, uh, gave him a standing ovation that went on forever. It was just special, and I thought the call was really good. It's one of my favorite calls of all time from my own from my personal situation. And then game six, when he hit 600, it was really funny because he 2 years, 3 years go by, whatever it was, and he's got 598 home runs. And I go through the clubhouse one day. And he said, "Hey, you and I got to talk." I said, "We're not doing this again, are we?" He said, "Yes, we are." And so he again, he hit it in an inning that I normally broadcast in. And I jokingly say he hit it down in Miami before 150 people. I don't know how many people were in the stands that night, but they didn't draw very well. And he hit number 600, and I made that call too. So it was really pleasing to me that it was important to him that I make the call, because he was not one to show a lot of emotion about anything. And for him to want my voice on that first home run and then number 600 was special to me. And I've always been appreciative of him for that.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. The walk-off home run in 2010 by Jay Bruce was also a very important call for you. Why was that one so special for you?
I don't know. People are shocked when they say, what are your favorite calls? And I say, well, Jay Bruce's home run and Ken Griffey Jr.'s 500th home run are my two favorite. I mean, I don't mention Pete's record-breaking hit. I don't mention Browning's perfect game, Seaver's only no-hitter, any of those great moments. I just like the calls. I think most of us in this profession are our own worst critics. And we know if we walk out of a booth at night, we had a bad night. We know if we had a good night. We know if we had a good call. We know we had a bad call. We don't need people to tell us that. But if they are historic events, that call is going to be replayed over and over and over again. And if you screw it up, you cringe and your stomach turns over, because you think, God, I had a shot to really make it sound good, and it was terrible. I felt like the Jay Bruce home run call was really a good one. And I felt the same way about Griffey's 500th home run. As I said something earlier to you, and if I was still working today, I would stand by it. And that is, I never tried to plan anything because I didn't think I was good enough. I've heard guys do it, and they weren't good enough, and it sounded contrived, and it takes away from the moment. And so I just tried to do it naturally and talk about the things that I felt were important, that were important then at that moment, and would be equally as important 20 years from now when somebody listens to the call. And thank God it came out okay. And I was very satisfied with those calls. And I think that's the reason why those two calls just stand out to me. I had nothing against the strikeout of Tracy Woodson to cap off Tom Browning's perfect game. It's become even more important to me now because of the tragic passing of Tom a year and a half ago. And he and I were relatively close at the time that he passed away. I think all of us in this profession, whether it be baseball or football or basketball or hockey or whatever the case might be, all of us have certain calls that stand out in our own minds over all others. And I think they probably were my two favorite calls.
Oh, I can certainly see that. I can certainly see that. Let me ask you about when in the years that Deion Sanders played for the Reds, he did something in a certain home game, and that warranted the Reds fans giving him a standing ovation. And after his career ended, he mentioned that in all of his time playing sports, college football, pro football, Super Bowl, this thing, that thing, that was the only time in his career where he truly felt loved and appreciated. What makes it? You had several opportunities to leave and go to other stadiums. The Red Sox were one such team, and you stayed in Cincy for 46 years. I know you're very proud of that, but what makes the city of Cincinnati and the Reds fans so special? And can you describe your relationship with them?
Well, my relationship's been incredible. I think this is probably the most provincial city in the world. You have people that grow up on the west side I grow up on the north side. I grow up across the river in northern Kentucky, or whatever the case might be. And it's really funny. And when I heard it when I first came here, I couldn't really relate to it. But I found myself after being here for a lot of years, I fell right into the same pattern. In fact, I ran into somebody yesterday that was from Cincinnati. And the first question I asked him is, "Where'd you go to high school?" That's one of the prime lines that people in this town ask somebody when they meet them for the first time, "Where'd you go to high school?" And I find myself doing it all the time. Um, when I say provincial, that is when you come from outside, like I did. Um, they reserve judgment. They may say nice things if you're in the public eye, like obviously I was, but they will determine when they feel, if they ever do, that you're one of them. And once they do that, it's like if you and I were brothers, I could call you every hyphenated foul name under the sun.
Right.
But that guy sitting next to you better not do that, because
Right.
now it's a family affair. That's the way they are in this town. Pete Rose is still an idol in this town with all the bumps and grinds and hills and valleys that he's had to travel. He is still a favorite son in this town. I did first game of a twilight doubleheader against the San Francisco Giants right after the All-Star break in July of my first year. So I was here almost a half a season. And the reviews were okay. There were people that did not like my work, but often than not, there were people that did. But I did not feel like I had arrived. In the first game of that doubleheader was against the San Francisco Giants, and it was a twilight doubleheader at Riverfront, and the Reds went to the bottom of the ninth inning, trailing 13-9, and they rallied to win. Scored 5 runs in the bottom of the ninth, and the game-winning hit was a 2-run home run by Tony Perez over the center field fence. They win the game 14-13. I lost my mind. And our flagship station, WLW Radio, played it all. People were calling in all night long to hear the call. And at that point, I felt, I guess I finally arrived. And so on top of all of that, I have 3 kids, obviously all grown now. I've got 7 grandchildren. I just felt like this town offered everything that I could possibly want. I had chances to go to San Francisco, and as you mentioned, I came close to the Red Sox, came really close. Both Chicago franchises, a lot of places. And every time I had to make a decision to go, I said, I'm happy here. I like it here. Maybe my act wouldn't fly somewhere else, but it works here. Not that I planned on any act, but just coining a phrase. Mm-hmm. And I've never regretted it. There are a lot of guys in my profession. This business can be a very transient business because there are guys that always think the grass is greener. They're going to a larger market. They're going to make more money. They don't stop to think about the cost of living is more. The ability to travel from point A to point B is not nearly as convenient. I was pretty smart in that I took everything into account, and I've never regretted it. And I feel like I've been one of them for more years than I can care to remember. And one of the things that I said in my going away speech at the end of my last game was, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to live in this town. If you run into me at Kroger or somewhere else, by all means, come up and introduce yourself, and we'll talk as long as you want to. And I've had people play that line back to me, and I meant it when I said it, and I mean it today. I'd be stupid to leave a town that embraced me in the manner in which it did, and brought me so much joy, not only as a broadcaster, but as a guy who had 3 kids that all turned out well. So I was blessed. There are a lot of great announcers who have moved around, but I was not going to find myself being a nomad and traveling from point A to point B to point C to point D just to make more money. Money was not that important to me when I started. I made far more than I ever dreamed I'd make. And so God bless me for being smart enough to say I'm going to stay in Cincinnati, Ohio.
And that's why the Reds Hall of Fame induction meant maybe more to you than even the Baseball Hall of Fame induction did. Is that correct?
It did. As much as, the highest honor I think you can receive in our business is go into the broadcaster's wing of the Hall of Fame. There's no higher honor than that. But the most gratifying honor for me was to go into the Reds Baseball Hall of Fame, the first non-player to go in. Um, and so it worked out perfectly for me. And all the guys that came back when I was inducted, it meant a whole lot to me. And so there's nothing about my career that I would change. There's nothing that I can think back upon that said I would say, I'd like to have a redo. I'd like to change that. And none of the decisions that I made relative to not going somewhere else and staying here in the city of Cincinnati.
Well, I certainly can't see you broadcasting games for Cubs fans. I'll say that. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's real fair.
Okay, I think so too.
You want me to tell that story?
Yes, please do.
We were playing. This is since Jeff Brantley came. Jeff and I worked for a number of years, and he's still here, and he's a dear friend of mine. And we were doing a game at Wrigley Field one night, and this was when Adam Dunn was with the Reds, and Adam hit a prodigious home run over the right field fence and across the street up on somebody's house. And they have a tradition at Wrigley Field where people will throw balls back on the field. And when Dunn's home run was hit, it seemed like 50 balls came out of the bleachers from right field foul pole to left field foul pole. And I lost my mind, and I criticized the Cub fans and said, this is why there isn't anybody that lives outside the city of Chicago that hopes this team ever wins anything. And I went on and on and on. So we had one more game to play, but I didn't get any feedback. So about 4 days after we left Chicago, I have a daughter, Dawn, who has lived there since 1990, and God bless her. She's had their 3 kids, and they've all been Cub fans, and she's always maintained her loyalties to the Reds. And she called me on the phone one night and said, Dad, what in the heck have you done? I said, what are you talking about? She said, I'm at a sports bar with a girlfriend of mine, and they're running a crawl at the bottom of every network station in Chicago, quoting the things that you said about Cub fans. She said, you might have a problem here. I said, no, I wouldn't say I might have. I probably have a pretty good one. So about a month later, we went back into Chicago. But before we went there, we were in Philadelphia. And I was in the clubhouse prior to a Reds-Phillies game, and my cell phone rings, and I look at it. It's a New York City area code. And so I can't figure out who's calling me. So I answered the phone. I said, hello. And the voice on the other said, Marty Brennaman. I said, yes, sir. He identified himself. He said, my name is whatever. And he said, I head up the security force for Major League Baseball. I'm a retired NYPD detective. We have either active officers in cities around Major League Baseball or retired guys like me who we hire in the event that we have any threats on people connected with our teams and with our games. I said, this is about Chicago. And he said, yes, it is. He said, you guys are going to go back in there next week. And he said, I said, have you had somebody threaten my life? He said, well, it's not incumbent upon me to tell you the threats we have. But he said, we've had enough threats that we need to address it. He said, you're going to be getting in touch in the next 24 hours with, and he named the fella, who is our guy in Chicago. And he'll talk to you about security measures when you come in with a team to play the Cubs. I said, this is ridiculous. He said, well, no, it's not. And so the guy calls me, and we're talking. This guy's very officious. He was an active Chicago PD detective, but doing freelance work for Major League Baseball. And I said, I'm coming in with a team on Sunday night. We play a home game. This is more than a week away. This is like 3 weeks away. And I said, we're coming in. We stay at the Westin Hotel right off of Michigan Avenue. He said, well, we'll meet you there. And we're going to pretty much be with you the whole time you're out in public. And I finally realized there's nothing I could do about it. And so we were wrapping up the phone conversation, and he almost hesitantly said, can I tell you something off the record? And I said, sure. He said, I'm a Chicago White Sox fan. The hell with the Cubs. I said, okay, that's fine. But I understand you got a job to do.
That's right.
So we get in there, and sure enough, they're there. The Reds had their own security guy. Every baseball team does, pro team does. And he went with us. And so that when I get off the bus and they said, what are you going to do? I said, well, my daughter lives up here and I'm going to go out and have dinner with my family. He said, we're going with you. I said, no, you're not going to have dinner with me. He said, can we follow you? I said, yeah. So we go to have dinner. The next day we go to the Navy Pier in Chicago. That's a big deal. They have rides for kids and my grandchildren, who are all grown now, except for one, we took them there. And Tom had his family up there. So we go there and we're standing there talking to a young Hispanic boy. He's probably college age kid. And he's working there to help put himself through college. And a very pleasant guy. And we're standing there, my son, Tom, and me, and my daughter and families. And the guy kept looking at Tom. And so Tom had to break away and go off with his kids. And the young guy said, that's Tom Brennaman, isn't it? And my daughter said, yeah. He said, you used to do the Cubs games. And my daughter Dawn said, yeah, he's my brother. And the guy said, he's the one who said those bad things about the Cubs. And my daughter said, oh, no, it wasn't my brother. It was my dad. And pointed at me. I said, Dawn, if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have no enemies. I said, you're going to get me killed. Nothing happened. But I think there are a lot of Cub fans today that don't care for Marty Brennaman.
Well, I mean, every fan base has their great fans and fans that aren't so great, and it just I guess it goes with the territory.
It does. That's true. That's right.
So in your several decades as a broadcaster, can you describe the special fraternity of broadcasters that you're a part of, and what was your relationship to broadcasters of other teams, maybe?
I think we have a great fraternity, just like anything else. I think there are some that I would rather spend more time with than others. I think there are some that have great big egos and feel like that they're the reason why people turn the radio on. That's not the case at all. If it wasn't for that game, we wouldn't have a job. So it's not about us. But I think that the one common thread with most of us is we never forget how tough it can be to get to where we are. I was fortunate because I did 3 years of AAA baseball and I came to the big leagues. I was very fortunate. I didn't work in the lower minor leagues. I didn't spend a lot of time riding buses. So I was blessed in that respect. But more often than not, you pay your dues and you work, you may work A ball, you may move up to AA and AAA and they get a big league job. And it takes a while for a lot of guys to get there. So I think that's a common thread that is bonding, so to speak. But I've had great relationships. I think about people like John Miller with the San Francisco Giants. I think they're the greatest bunch of guys in baseball today. John Miller and Dave Fleming and Dwayne Kuiper and Mike Frucco, all of them are dearest friends of mine. Tom Hamilton in Cleveland, Joe Castiglione in Boston. Skip Carey, it was almost like a second son to me. He was Chip Carey, rather. He was Chip is the son of Skip, who was a dear friend of mine with Atlanta. I had a great relationship with Vin Scully, and I think an incredible relationship because Vinny was I don't want to say aloof because that's not doing him justice, but Vinny was probably next to Joe Nuxall. Had no ego at all. And here's a guy who, when he was alive and out doing normal things like getting his gas tank filled up or going to the grocery store out in California, that day didn't go by when someone didn't say you were the greatest baseball announcer who ever lived. And he was. Yeah. You never know that. He was the sweetest man, a very religious man, very spiritual man, would go to mass 3 and 4 times a week. And he just, for some reason, took a liking to me. And we talk, and I think we talk in a personal vein quite a bit, aside from baseball. And when I announced I was retiring, he would call me, like he called me 3 or 4 times within a 4 or 5 week period. And so finally one night he called and we were talking, and I said, "Ben, let me ask you a question. We talked a lot lately. Are you concerned about my announcing my retirement? He laughed. He said, I just want to make sure that you know in your own mind that this is what you want to do. And I said, Ben, I love you like a brother. I said, I'm good with it. I've not had any second thoughts about it. I'm fine with the decision. And then my wife and I, this is, I don't know, I lose time now, 3 or 4 or 5 days. Uh, we had gone to Europe and we had gotten off a plane and he had passed away. I had found out about that. And we got off a plane on a Friday, and I think he passed away the day before or 2 days before we got back. And so I told my wife Amanda, I said, I'm done flying. I've been on an airplane a lot now, so I need to sit back and relax. Sunday afternoon, I'm watching TV and my phone rings, and I looked at the phone, and it was a call from a fellow by the name of Steve Brenner, who was a media relations director for the Dodgers way back in the 70s.
Oh, wow.
And it was a club executive, had risen, left the organization, come back. And I thought, what is he calling me for? And he said, the Scully family has asked me to call you because they would like to invite you and Amanda to the funeral. And it was by invitation only. You didn't go. They had to do it that way because of the hundreds of thousands. And so we had to hurry to make a plane reservation on Delta on Sunday afternoon. We flew to LA that night, got to the hotel about 11 o'clock. Bob Costas was checking in when I checked in. We went to our rooms. We got up. The funeral was at 10:30 on Monday morning. And it was, I don't know, they invited 350 people. And it was an unusual service because if you're a celebrity in Southern California, it's almost unheard of to have a funeral service with a lot of people there and not have celebrities involved in the service. There was not one single celebrity involved in that service. Nobody from baseball spoke. No celebrity from the motion picture industry or the entertainment business spoke. The only people who spoke were Ben's children, his grandchildren. It was a Roman Catholic high mass funeral service conducted by two priests who did an incredible job. And it was just a celebration of his life and what a great person he was. Every bit of it was true. And we were blessed to be there. They had a big reception after it was over, and we got a chance to see a lot of people we'd not seen in a long time. Mm-hmm. And everybody was there because of one thing, because they loved the guy. And I was privileged to work with him, alongside him. My last game at Dodger Stadium, and Vinny had retired 2 years or 3 years earlier. And I was on the field by the first base dugout, which is the visiting dugout at Dodger Stadium, and I'm talking to guys. And our clubhouse manager, Rick Stowe, came out of the clubhouse, and he said, you better get your rear end upstairs. And I said, for what? He said, the Pope is up there. And he simply came out to this ballpark tonight to see you for the last time as a broadcaster. And I looked up, and there he was. And I cut off my conversation and went upstairs. And he had come just to Dodger Stadium that night to see me because he knew it was the last game I was going to work. I think that there may be people listening to this podcast that knew him and knew him better than I did. But I think everybody would echo the sentiments that he was truly a great person and a great broadcaster. And if they don't think he's the best that ever lived, all I would say to people is, go to YouTube and listen to his call of Sandy Koufax's ninth inning perfect game, and then get back to me and tell me you've heard anything great. It'll make the hair stand up on the back of your neck. Or the call of Kirk Gibson's home run in the World Series off Dennis Eckersley. The man was brilliant, but on top of that, and even more important, he was just a wonderful human being.
That's wow. That's quite an honor, and I know how much he appreciated you with all the time that he spent with you as well.
Yeah, like I said, I don't know that we spent a whole lot of time together, but when
Mhm.
we did, it was special. And
Right.
he was just he if I had an idol in the business, he was a guy hands down, no question.
Understood. Understood. Well, let me ask you just a couple more things here, and then we'll get on to some lunch and some football.
Okay.
You mentioned in your Hall of Fame induction speech in 2000 that that Pete Rose should also be inducted into Cooperstown. Do you still feel that way today, and why do you feel so strongly about him being inducted?
Well, I've gone full circle. When he was thrown out of the game,
Mhm.
I agreed 100% because if there's one rule in baseball that's plastered on the wall of every clubhouse, and that deals with gambling on games. An outgrowth of the 1919 Black Sox scandal when Kennesaw Mountain Landis did what he had to do at the time to maintain the integrity of the game. But then as years have passed, my opinion has changed because I think there's a level of hypocrisy involved in baseball today. You can hardly turn around at the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown without seeing something that Pete Rose accomplished that enhances the romance of the game of baseball. My feeling is this: if you're not going to let him in, or you're not going to allow him to be eligible to be voted in, then you take everything with Pete Rose's name attached to it, or any achievement that Pete Rose accomplished in his career. Should be no mention of Pete Rose at the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. I don't think you can have it both ways. If you're going to extol the virtues that he accomplished as a player and what he stood for as a player, the all-time hit king, then you got to let him. I don't think the Hall of Fame will ever be full without Pete Rose's plaque alongside all the rest of the greats who have played the game. Even more so now, when baseball and football and basketball and hockey have sold their souls to the gambling industry
Right.
and are reaping hundreds of millions of dollars a year because of the legalization. I think there are 19 states now that don't have it. They all will fall into the same pattern as the rest of them. And soon you'll have all 50 states that will have gambling legalized. You've got to rethink this thing. I don't know what the commissioner, what he thinks he's accomplishing by steadfastly refusing to allow Pete to be eligible for the Hall of Fame. I think it's criminal. And hopefully before I go, and certainly I hope before he goes, that smarter minds, wiser minds will prevail, and they will allow him to be eligible to go into the Hall of Fame.
That was my next question is if you thought he was going to be if you thought that they were going to relent on that, or if it was going to be a deal where it was just posthumously
Well,
where he gets inducted.
that's a good point because, I say this to groups all the time, and I emphasize that what I'm getting ready to say is not born out of any knowledge of inside information that I have, but it almost would make me believe that he'll be in one day, but he won't be in until after he's gone. And I think if that's the case, if I were his family, it's easy for me to say. If that were the case, if I were his family and that time came, I'd say, the hell with you people. I don't want any part of it. If he can't be around to enjoy it, then I don't see the necessity of making a big deal about it after he's gone.
Understood. Understood. Well, your son Tom joined you in the broadcast booth in 2007 to broadcast a Reds game. How special was that day for you, and what does it mean to you as a father that he followed in your footsteps to be a successful broadcaster?
Well, I think the latter part is very important because I think and we've all seen them. No matter what walk of life your dad was in, if your dad was eminently successful in whatever walk of life, inherently, in most cases, there are going to be maybe very subtle pressure brought to bear on having you follow in his footsteps. I never did that. I never sat Tom down and said, "You ought to think about getting into this business." And he grew up in it,
Mhm.
and he saw enough good things about it that that's what he wanted to do as a vocation. And I think it's one of the great compliments that a son or a daughter can pay to a parent, that they see enough of the good things that his mom or dad or both did that they want to follow in those same footsteps. Now I have a grandson, Tom's son, Luke, who's a freshman at Indiana University, who has one of the great broadcast schools in the United States, and he wants to do the same thing. He's a freshman there now. I was just up there this weekend visiting him, and so that was important, and it was a compliment to me, and I've thanked him a number of times for that, and the fact that we did that one game together was a dream come true for me, because that time he was doing the Cub games, and he and I did a Reds Cubs game at Riverfront Stadium. I did half the game play by play. He did the other half, and the only black mark on that night was the Cubs won the game. Reds didn't win, but it was a memorable moment for me, and I know it was a memorable moment for him.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I'm glad you guys got to share that together. That's
Yeah.
fantastic. So as for working in baseball, how important is it to have an understanding spouse at home during the season? What has Amanda meant to you in your career?
Well, you have to understand, Amanda's my third wife.
Yes.
As I tell people, that the road to matrimonial bliss has been a very expensive one for me. Um, uh, she's been great. She's 30 years younger than I am.
Okay.
We have the same birthday, July 28th.
Okay.
I was born in 42. She was born in 72. So I'm 81. She's 51.
Okay.
She has been devoted in every sense of the word to me. She will not allow me to sit in my easy chair and spend hours watching my big screen television. She loves to travel, and so it stands to reason that she loves to travel, then I better enjoy it too. And she loves to plan trips, and thank God we can go on them. And when Joe retired, he was physically unable to do a lot of the things that he wanted to do. And I made a pact with myself then that would not be the case. And I'm the healthiest, knock on wood, I'm the healthiest 81-year-old guy I know. I walk 5 miles a day, and my weight is good. I don't have any cholesterol or blood pressure problems. I'm healthy. Now, an actuary, insurance actuary will tell you that means absolutely nothing at my age, that you could drop dead in the next 5 minutes. I live with that. I know that. But I'd rather be healthy in my own mind like I am than be otherwise. And so we were in Europe twice this summer. I went on a cruise down the Danube River. We just came back 3 weeks ago from 2 weeks in England. We're planning a trip to Switzerland and Germany next July. We enjoy life, and I don't know of another couple that spends more time together than she and I do, and we don't get tired of that. And so I was very fortunate to marry her and to reap the benefits of the things that she does with me in mind to keep me young and keep me healthy. And she's been a very, very special person in my life.
No, absolutely. Good for both of you. I'm glad that you have that, and that you're so active. It's very impressive, actually.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, sir. So you also have your own website, martybrennaman.com. Can you tell us what type of broadcasting services that you offer there with your decades of expertise as a broadcaster?
Greg, can I be honest with you about something?
Yes, sir.
I didn't even know about that website. In fact, when you mentioned that to me in the correspondence that we had last night, I punched it up. And that is the first time I've ever laid eyes on that. I assume that that's something that she's done that I didn't know about. I didn't know anything at all about that. I find it interesting because it's gotten very little play about people. I think most people are like me. I didn't even know about it. I'm on Instagram a lot. I'm on Twitter a lot.
Okay.
And she's on Facebook a lot. People follow her religiously because of all the travels that we do.
Sure.
But I had no idea about martybrennaman.com until you mentioned it. So I want to thank you for that. And I'm going to pay more attention to it from now on.
You're welcome. I didn't plan on breaking any news here today, but so be it.
That was big. You did me a favor, man. I'm not kidding you.
No, thank you. You're helping me out here. So let me ask you one more thing here. So I'd like to ask you about the Dragonfly Foundation, Cincinnati, that you've supported. faithfully for so many years. Why does that particular foundation mean so much to you, and how can the listeners support that?
Well, I don't. It's not important to me out of any personal experience I've had. But
Okay.
back in 2012, I guess it was, I made a bet with one of our coaches in May of that season. The club had been playing well, and we had just swept the Milwaukee Brewers, and we were standing on the charter flight while the luggage was being loaded on early evening Sunday to fly to wherever we were going. And Chris Spire, who was Dusty Baker's bench coach, and I were talking on the plane, and he said, "This club is really playing well." I said, "They're playing as well as I've seen the Reds team play in a long time." He said, "This team, if it continues to play the way it's playing, could win 10 games in a row." I said, "I don't think so." He said, "Why?" I said, "Well, still, their pitching is inconsistent. Their hitting is inconsistent. And I think that would prohibit them from winning 10 in a row." He said, "Well, I disagree with that." And I said, "Well, that's the way it is." He said, "What would you do if they won 10 in a row?" And I said, "I don't know. What would you have me do?" He said, "Would you shave your head?" And I had full head of hair then.
Right.
I said, "Yeah, I'd shave my head." So now the season goes along, and now we're in late July, and we're playing a weekend series in Denver. And we're going home right after that series for a homestand. The following Friday night, the club, it was 2012, because they were going to honor me on my 70th birthday on the first game of a series against the Pirates on the following Friday night.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the Friday we go into Denver, the club had won 7 games in a row. I don't even remember that conversation with Chris Fire. They win Friday night, they win Saturday night, and now we go into Sunday. And I go to the ballpark. Amanda was with me on the trip, and I said goodbye to her. I said, "I'll see you on the charter going back to Cincinnati when the game's over." So I get on the team bus to go to the hotel, to go to the ballpark, and I walk into the clubhouse that Sunday morning, and guys are bouncing off 4 walls. There was an energy that I had not seen. So I'm standing there with a perplexed look on my face, and Spire walks up to me and he said, "What do you think?" I said, "What the heck's going on?" He said, "You don't remember, do you?" I said, "I had no idea what you're talking about." He said, "Let me take you back to that Sunday afternoon in May when you and I were standing." I said, "Stop." He said, "You know where I'm going with this?" I said, "Yep." He said, "If they win today, you're going to back up what you said?" I said, "Just so we're on the same page, am I going to shave my head?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Absolutely, I will." So they win. We go home. The club really picked up on it, and they promoted the dickens out of me. I agreed to have my head shaved after the Friday night game at home plate. I had my own guy who cut my hair. He said they had almost a near sellout for the game. They had the Reds shut out the Pirates. And the Tuesday before, a buddy of mine who was very active in things that went on at Children's Hospital. He was a big benefactor, and he called me on the phone. He said, "I got to tell you something." I said, "What?" He said, "I was over at Children's Hospital yesterday, and I saw a group of young kids." He said kids that were going through chemotherapy or for whatever. And he said, a couple of these little girls had shirts on that said, "I'm still me." And it was very, very emotional, because these are kids that, because of chemotherapy, had bald heads. And kids at that age look upon kids like that. There's something strange about them, and they make fun of them. And that's "I'm still me." That's what all that was about. And he said, that one of the little girls said, "Friday night, Marty Brennaman is going to be just like us." He said, "Would you wear this shirt Friday night?" I said, "I will." So I had the T-shirt on underneath a Reds jersey that they had given me with the numeral 70 on the back, my name. So I go down and I sit down in the chair, and my guy he cuts my hair. And when they finished, I stood up And there were three little girls there. I had no idea what the Dragonfly Foundation was. I had no idea. There are three little girls there with those shirts on, and they were all bald headed. And I took off the Reds jersey and I had the T-shirt, same T-shirt that they had on. I went over there, I embraced all three of them and kissed each one of them on the top of the head. And that was the beginning of my affiliation with the Dragonfly Foundation. And I've done events for them. I've done things for them when they call upon, not so much lately, because they've really reached a point now where they're almost becoming a national organization. They've got offices in Chicago. They're constantly in a fundraising mode, however. And what they do is, with families that come in here to have their children treated at Children's Hospital, their whole lives are thrown upside down. In many cases, it's a life and death situation, unfortunately. And the Dragonfly does things for these families to try and lessen the pain of being in a strange city and not knowing anybody. They get them tickets to ball games, to concerts, to restaurants. And so I do what I can and when I can, when they want me to. And I feel like early on, I really feel like they do, that my celebrity in this town helped them really get really started quicker than otherwise they might have. And so it's meant a lot to me. It's tough to be around children that know nothing but sickness and pain. And some of these kids know very little about anything but being in hospitals, because some of them were diagnosed as early as 2 and 3 and 4 years old. And it's just a tragic thing. The happy endings are the ones that they get to in time, and they go on to live a happy, fruitful life. But there are just as many that don't. And so it's important that people know about them. It's important that people are willing to contribute to them, and to keep this a viable foundation that exists only for the benefit of helping families of children who have cancer or leukemia, and older kids alike, not just young children, but older kids alike. They don't have to be, under 10 years old. There's some that can be 18, 19, 20 years old, but they're all in the same boat. And Dragonfly does a wonderful job.
Well, thank you so much for your work with them. I know how much they appreciate you. And
it's meant an awful lot to me. It really has, and it brings home the fact that, if you have healthy children, which I've been blessed, and happy grandchildren, and they are healthy grandchildren, it really makes you realize how fortunate you are that you have kids that are healthy. It's really indescribable.
Amen. Absolutely. My wife and I have an 8-year-old, and I'm right there with you. I certainly understand that, and we're very grateful and blessed as well. Well, thank you, Marty, very much for speaking with me this morning. I appreciate you very much for your time and your countless contributions to baseball, and certainly I know the city of Cincinnati appreciates you very much as well. I had an absolute blast talking to you. I appreciate your stories and everything that you were able to experience as a broadcaster and a baseball man. And I can't thank you enough for being my guest today.
Well, it's been my pleasure, Greg, and I was honored to have you want to spend time with me. And down the road, if we get a chance, I'm always willing to sit down and chat with you, pal.
I appreciate you so much. Thank you, Marty.
Thank you, Greg.
All right, everyone. Thank you again for listening to the Heroes and Icons podcast with your host, Greg Randolph. Once more, thank you to our guest, Marty Brennaman, and a very special thank you to Amanda Brennaman for her help in coordinating the interview today. You can find the links to those to the foundation website, to the Dragonfly Foundation that we mentioned, and to martybrennaman.com in the show notes for the podcast. And again, if you would be so kind as to 5-star review the show and subscribe so you don't miss an episode wherever you might be listening, that would be very much appreciated. Thank you again, everyone, for listening. Have a great night. God bless.
All right, pal.